Today I'm going to show you guys a quick tour of the shop here at Westridge Middle School. I don't know if we'll have a chance to get in here at all this semester, but hopefully we do. This way you'll have an idea as to what kind of tools we have available and what they're called. After watching the video, there'll be a short quiz over identifying the names of these tools, so make sure you pay close attention. When you first walk into the wood shop, the first place you want to stop is right here at the safety glasses station. Grab one of these pairs of safety glasses. They are required whenever you are using any tools. Whether they're hand tools or power tools, you must be wearing safety glasses. The only time you can take your safety glasses off is if you are painting or staining, but it's still suggested that you wear glasses at that time because you never know when something will go flying through the air in woodshop class. Going along the countertop here, we've got our sandpaper buckets, two different roughness levels, what we call grit. This is the more rough sandpaper, and this is the less rough, the smoother sandpaper. Got some tape measures here. This tool right here is called a lathe. The lathe spins the piece of wood around pretty fast, and then you have a set of knives that you can use to carve different shapes or designs into the piece of wood. We don't use this here at Westridge Middle School, but I do want you to know what the name of the tool is. Again, right there, it's called a lathe. Over here we have our hand tool cabinet. Inside our hand tool cabinets are several different kinds of tools. On the side here, we have different kinds of files that you can use for smoothing out wood. These would be if you have a big mistake that you need to fix, that sandpaper just isn't rough enough to fix. We rarely use files in the woodshop class because usually you don't make that big of a mistake unless you're at the very beginning stage. Up here we have what are called coping saws. Some of these don't have blades on them, but they should look like this. Notice the very, very thin blade that is on the coping saw. This would be for cutting curves or other kinds of designs that you want to cut out of a piece of wood. Like if you wanted to make a heart or a circle, we use these to cut our initials out of a piece of wood. These saws are simply called hand saws. Sometimes people call them back saws or toolbox saws. These would be used for cutting a piece of wood to a certain length if you wanted to cut a straight line all the way through the wood. This saw right here is a type of hand saw called a miter saw. It's different than the back saws over here because it has the extra metal backing on it that makes the blade very, very stiff and rigid. So it makes it so that your line cuts very, very nice and straight. When using these other hand saws, they can bend and flex while you're cutting. See the bend in it? And that can cause you to cut curves when you don't want a curve. You want a nice straight line. So that's why the miter saw can be more beneficial when cutting a straight line. But the drawback is that extra metal on the back makes it so that if you're cutting a very thick piece of wood, you won't be able to cut all the way through the piece of wood in one cut. These are what are called squares. Sometimes people call them speed squares or carpenter squares. These are used for measuring your wood to mark the length that you want to cut it to. And then there's a way that you can use this to mark a perfectly straight line all the way across your piece of wood. These are much better than using a tape measure or trying to do it by hand because this little lip right here can go on the edge of the wood and make sure that you get a nice perpendicular line going all the way across your piece of wood. There are some other tools in here that we don't use very often. For example, those are hand planes. We really don't use those at our school because we have the belt sanders that do the same job and take much less work. More of the same. You see these saws right here. These are called compass saws. These are pretty good for cutting a straight line. They can also be used for cutting smaller curves, not very tight curves. So it's kind of a blend of the coping saw and the back saw. Over here we have the table saw. You can see the sign, table saw. This is a tool that is not able to be used by students at any time at Westridge Middle School. When you go on to Shawnee Mission West, I believe they train you on how to use the table saw safely, but here it is for teacher use only. Over here we have a few different kinds of sanders. This one's called our belt sander. It's got a belt and a disc on it. You can use either part for sanding your wood smooth. They both run at the same time when you push the on switch, but there's still only one person allowed at the tool at a time. This is called the spindle sander. It spins around and would be used for sanding what are called inside curves of a piece of wood. The belt is used for sanding straight lines and outside curves. Over here we have some planers. These tools are not used by students here at our school, so we won't spend too much time on those. But I just wanted you to know what the name of these tools are. We have a jointer here. This is not used by students at our school either. The jointer is used to make sure that you have a perfect right angle between two faces of a piece of wood. The planer is used to make sure that you have a perfectly flat face on your piece of wood. So if you glued a bunch of different pieces of wood together and then you wanted to make sure that they were perfectly flat, like if you were making a cutting board out of different thicknesses of piece of wood and you glued them together, then you could run them through the planer and get them to be perfectly flat all the way across. Over here we have our band saws. This is the tool that you will use probably the second most. The sander over here is probably the one that you'll spend the most time on, but the bandsaw is a close second. Bandsaws are okay for cutting straight lines. They're really good for cutting curves and other designs. Notice the reasonably thin blade on it right here. This is the blade, and it's pretty thin, which helps it to cut curves well. If you want to cut a nice, perfectly straight line, you would want to use this tool over here, which is called the miter saw. Notice that the blade on the miter saw is much, much thicker. This blade is 12 inches thick, whereas the blade on the bandsaw is only 1/4 of an inch thick. So this would be used for cutting a nice straight line all the way through your piece of wood. For example, what I did with this piece of wood right here. Notice how it cut a perfect straight edge on it. This tool right here is called a router. There's the sign for it, router table. This is a tool that students are not allowed to use. This would be for teacher use only. It's used to put a decorative edge on a piece of wood. Like if you don't want the piece of wood on the edge to be perfectly flat like this one, and you want it to be curved or it's kind of a wavy shape, then that's what you would use the router for. The final tool that you will use here at Westridge is the drill press. Here are our 3 drill presses. This is a tool that you'll use not quite as often as the bandsaw and the sander, but you will use them quite often. They're used for making holes in a piece of wood. You can make the hole go all the way through the wood or only part way through the wood, and you can change how big the hole is by changing what is called the drill bit. Notice this drill bit here is very, very large. So it would make a large hole in the wood, whereas this drill bit is very thin and would make a much smaller hole in the wood. That's all the tools that you will be using here at Westridge. After you're done with this video, you will be taking a quiz to identify the names of the tools that you saw in the video.